Well, let's take a look at Big Jim and the White Boy by David F. Walker and Marcus Kwame Anderson. Welcome back to Comics Are Dope. I'm BJ Kicks, and this is my overview and review of Big Jim and the White Boy, an American classic reimagined. This is written by David F. Walker with art by Marcus Kwame Anderson. They are an Eisner Award-winning duo. They previously did the Black Panther Party for 10 Speed Graphic, which is also the publisher of this book. And if you're not familiar, Big Jim and the White Boy is a reimagining, a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but from the perspective of the supporting character, Jim. So if you're familiar with Huckleberry Finn, then you know it's a controversial book. It's mostly controversial for its usage of the N-word in its depiction of Jim as a runaway slave and how how Huckleberry Finn interacts with him, as well as other characters in the story. But this book basically seeks to reclaim Jim's agency, reclaim Jim's identity, and tell a really cool action-packed story. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. By the way, this one's got a cover price of $35. And yeah, it's dope. It's an adaptation brought to you by 10 Speed Graphic. Now, like I said, this is written by David F. Walker, and it's a reimagining of a literary classic in Huckleberry Finn. But it's not without, its own controversy. Like the text it's adapting is controversial. Therefore, this is going to be controversial as well. Let me turn the autofocus off so we can get into it. So this book starts off with an author's note, a sort of foreword from David F. Walker, speaking about the elephant in the room, which is the N-word. So, like I said, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, I had an interesting relationship with. It's one of the few books that I was required to read in high school that I actually did read. And it's funny because it was presented to us as this literary classic mostly for its usage of dialect. Like Mark Twain used not just dialect to resemble the the slaves, but dialect for like Missouri and St. Louis and all these things. And so, when you listen or you read Huckleberry Finn, you read it with a Southern drawl. Funny enough, to prepare for this, I revisited Huckleberry Finn via the audiobook. There's an audiobook performed by, is it Elijah Wood? And I mean, he nails all the dialogue, but the one thing that is staggering about that book is its usage of the N-word. It even hits you even harder when you're listening to it. But anyway, long story short, there's an author's note here from David F. Walker that basically, if you ever saw that old Jay-Z interview with Oprah, David Walker takes the same stance as Jay-Z in his usage of the N-word. By the way, the N-word does appear in this book several times, several dozen times. And that might be a conservative estimate. But whenever it does appear, it is censored. So if that's something that you're sensitive to, just know. So what is this book, though? This book is, like I said, a retelling of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So we start off sort of listening to an account of what Huckleberry Finn was, and we get a kind of excerpt from it. And right here we get this, it's Jim speaking in, slave dialects. I's afraid to look, right? And so you're seeing this, right? You's fool enough to be on this rack, Huck Finn, and I's fool enough to be a following, right? So it's like you get the sort of, I wouldn't call it jive speak to use airplane language, but you get the picture. And then we enter present day, or what is then present day, in 1932. And here is Jim saying, like, hold up, that's not how it happened. And what hooked me on this book is that we immediately address the elephant of the room. Like, why does Jim speak that way? And basically, it's immediately kind of written off as Jim is code switching. Jim is speaking the way he needs to speak for survival, but he's obviously smarter than he presents himself as. And then we get straight into Jim telling his story. And what I love about it is that Jim is the hero. Of course, everyone is the hero in their own story. What you find over the course of this book is that both Jim and Huck are still alive, and they're actually sitting and telling this story to Jim's descendants later. And there are points where they disagree on what happened because, again, they each see themselves as the hero of their own stories, even when those stories involve each other. And so it's pretty fun to see just how the relationship is portrayed. So this takes place in a few different time periods. Like 1855 is when the original Adventures of Huckleberry Finn take place. 1932 is when they're telling the story to Jim's descendants. And then we flash forward into 2022 at Howard University. Basically, one of Jim's great-grandchildren is a professor, and she is offering the sort of real-world context for the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and how it may have been based on real people. This is a work of fiction, by the way, and it takes, as a presumption that Jim was a real person. So it's like, what if Jim was a real person that this book was based off of? And what if Jim was her great-grandfather? And like, what kind of research would she have done to find out more about his side of the story and then work to present it to, just the public record? So that's kind of the context for this book. And so we're getting the story as told by Jim to his descendants of exactly what happened on their adventures down the Mississippi River on this raft. And you see there is a twist in here. And one of the questions that's raised by this professor is like, we know that Jim had a family because they mention it in Huckleberry Finn, but you never get to see him as a family man. You never get to see him even like talk about his family like that. What if that was a bigger part of the narrative? And so we see Jim's actions are almost always motivated by the fact that he's trying to get back to his family. He wants to see his wife and his children, and he will stop at nothing to see his wife and children again. And so when they are confronted by angry mobs or people that are trying to track runaway slaves, Jim does what he has to do to avoid a disastrous outcome. And so the original Tom Sawyer I keep saying Tom Sawyer, the original Huckleberry Finn is, it's renowned, and it stands out for its sort of portrayal of this young white boy who doesn't fully understand like the wiles of racism. Like, why are people racist? Why are N-words not considered people? Right? And so he asks Jim, and in one moment in this book, Jim is like, I couldn't tell you the difference between an N-word and a man, but I can tell you that a white man doesn't want to be one. And that's perhaps tells me everything I need to know about my state as a man. And so that was interesting. But like I said, this book, it's action-packed. There is always something lurking around every corner. And at every turn, Jim has an opportunity to be a hero and takes it. He's a man of action. He's a man of principle. And, I love that about it. I love that we're getting like all these different sequences. So we get, like I said, 1855, 1932, and 2022. And the way that it's handled in the story, you get the action when you need the action. You get a break when you need a break. And it's entertaining all the way throughout. I got to take this moment to shout out the art by Marcus Kwame Anderson. I really love the acting. The expressions on each character's face is just awesome. Are just awesome. Expressions are awesome. Subject verb agreement, guys. Anyway, what's really cool also, besides like just the fact that the art is amazing, speaking of, the colors are by, is it Isabella? Isabel Struble. Gotta shout out the colors on there, because I really love the flat coloring style with the cell shading. This looks like it could be, an animated short film, and I would love to see it that way. I don't know who would greenlight it, but I would love to see this story animated. I think it would be awesome. But all in all, besides the fact that you get Jim as a man who is out to get his family, we also get Jim as a freedom fighter, an abolitionist. Some might even call him the second coming of Nat Turner. And I think that's a very interesting twist for Jim. Because Jim is portrayed as this super docile character who does have a bit of courage. Like, he's there, he's defending Huck in, the original text. But to see him use his courage to not just free, his master's nephew, but to free his people is just awesome. And he suffers consequences for it. Obviously, I don't want to spoil this book. I think no matter what imagery I show you, like, this book is an entertaining read and you should check it out for yourself for sure. And I do a lot on this channel. I often cover books by African-American creators. And I just recently, I did Lies My Teacher Told Me, which does not have an African-American creator, but it speaks about, like, just sort of the way American history textbooks are manipulated to tell a certain narrative. And I thought it was one of the most important books of the year. This is right up there with that for me. I think it's really cool how real life history gets intertwined in this book that is clearly fiction and clearly based on a work of fiction, but somehow putting it in the context of the metatextual narrative of the day, and then putting that into context of today's times, just makes for a really interesting and entertaining and historically relevant read. Like, the way we look at Mark Twain's work as like a classic, this tells us that we should probably, think about the way we identify with it. Think about the way we revere it. Not that it should not be revered, but what other questions should we be asking about it? What should we be asking about this time period? And how do we keep the memories great? So I'm going to start skipping forward, because at this point we're at the back of the book and we are now we're in spoiler territory. But like I said, The Lost Cause by Edward Pollard, a real book, Gone with the Wind. And then Big Jim and the White Boy, obviously being the work of fiction, but it's woven in with these real life stories. And there are even like hints at like inspiration in people in present day doing similar work, reclaiming narratives of people that, can't speak up for themselves anymore. And so there are historical notes here. There's a really touching part of this that David Walker talks about his late mother. And it's really cool. It's really cool. But anyway, I thought this was an amazing book. And usually I don't always read the entire book before I show it to you guys. Like, I want you to see it as quickly as possible so that you can go out to the stores and get it. But this was a book I could not put down. I read half of it before New York Comic Con. I came back in town and read the other half. And man, it's great. All the praise for this book are well deserved, and I'm excited to be able to show it to you. So a huge thank you to 10 Speed Graphic for sending this copy over. This gets my highest recommendation. If you have enjoyed things like Bitterroot, which David F. Walker did write on, books like Excellence, like, there are a lot of books that I've recommended to you guys by African-American creators that have a sort of historical significance, even if it's just in that its character portrayals in fiction are awesome. This stands right up there with the best of those. So you should check this one out. If you trust me, then trust me. Go pick this book up, and I'll see you guys in another video soon. Till then, stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.